On Bath Road in West Chadsmoor stood a small bungalow that blended quietly into the neighbourhood, easy to miss, ordinary to the eye, surrounded by homes glowing with Christmas lights and decorated windows that spoke of warmth, laughter, and family gatherings. Inside those nearby houses, people were preparing meals, wrapping gifts, and counting down the hours to Christmas morning. But inside Lucy Clews' bungalow, the atmosphere was entirely different. The rooms were dim, the silence heavy, and the sense of loss hung in the air like a thick fog that refused to lift. Just weeks earlier, death had already walked through that front door and taken away the man Lucy loved, leaving behind memories in every room and a loneliness that echoed through the walls. As Christmas approached, Lucy wasn't hoping for celebration or joy. She was simply trying to survive the quiet. She didn't want presents. She didn't want decorations. She wanted company, a human presence to remind her she wasn't completely alone in the world. That simple, deeply human desire for connection would lead her to make a choice born from vulnerability rather than recklessness. A choice that felt harmless, even kind, in the moment. Because while others opened their doors to family and friends that Christmas, Lucy opened hers to someone she barely knew. And without realizing it, she invited the person who would end her life into her home. Lucy Clews was far more than a name in a headline or a victim in a courtroom. She was a daughter, a granddaughter, a sister, and someone deeply loved by those who knew her best. At 39 years old, Lucy was known for her gentle nature, her beautiful golden hair, and a quiet kindness that defined how she moved through the world. To neighbors she was private and reserved, someone who kept to herself, but to her family, she was everything. Her mother, Linda, described Lucy as the light of her life, a bond so close that daily communication was not optional. It was a constant. Lucy called her mother several times every single day without fail, no matter what she was facing, no matter how difficult life became. Those calls were reassurance, comfort, and proof that Lucy was still holding on. She shared a special closeness with her grandmother Elizabeth and had siblings who cared deeply about her safety and happiness. Even in moments of struggle, Lucy's heart remained open to the people she loved. She had fought addiction for many years, a quiet and exhausting battle that shaped parts of her life but never defined her soul. Despite those struggles, her compassion never disappeared, and her ability to care for others remained intact. When her family spoke of her after her death, they didn't describe her by her pain or her mistakes. They remembered her as their beautiful golden-haired baby girl, someone who loved deeply and was loved just as fiercely in return. In early December 2021, Lucy's fragile world collapsed completely inside the bungalow on Bath Road. On December 3rd, she found her husband, Stephen Clews, slumped on their bed, unresponsive, his body unnaturally still in the room they shared. Panic took over as Lucy tried desperately to wake him, pouring water over his head, calling his name, refusing to accept what her instincts were already telling her. When it became clear that Stephen was in cardiac arrest, she called for an ambulance, clinging to the hope that help might still arrive in time. It didn't. Stephen was pronounced dead, and later, an inquest would determine that he had died from a drug overdose. For Lucy, this wasn't just the sudden loss of a husband, it was the loss of her anchor. Stephen had been the one constant in her chaotic world, the person who understood her struggles, who loved her despite them, and who made life feel survivable even on its hardest days. His death left Lucy unmoored, drifting in a reality she no longer recognized. In the days that followed, she withdrew from the outside world, shutting herself away as grief swallowed her whole. Visitors were kept at a distance, phone calls unanswered, the weight of loss too heavy to carry in company. The house that had once felt like a shared refuge now felt hollow, every room a reminder of what she had lost. With Stephen gone, Lucy was no longer just grieving, she was vulnerable in a way that few around her fully understood. Her emotional defenses were gone, stripped away by shock, love, and unbearable absence. And as Christmas crept closer, the pain only deepened, pressing in on her from every direction. As if the emotional devastation wasn't enough, Lucy's physical health began to fail under the strain of grief. She was diagnosed with pneumonia and admitted to hospital, her body weakened at the exact moment her heart was breaking. Doctors urged rest, caution, and time to recover, but Lucy's mind was fixed on one thing she could not avoid: Stephen's funeral. Against medical advice, on December 21st, just days before Christmas, Lucy discharged herself from the hospital. She was still unwell, still struggling to breathe properly, but she was determined to stand by her husband one last time. 4 days before Christmas, Lucy stood at the graveside, burying the man she loved while fighting illness, exhaustion, and grief that threatened to overwhelm her. Those who saw her that day later described a woman running on pure will, holding herself together through sheer determination. Judge Christina Montgomery KC would later describe Lucy as a recently widowed woman, grieving the loss of her husband whom she had buried only days before her own death. After the funeral, Lucy returned alone to the bungalow on Bath Road. The warmth of the service faded quickly, replaced by silence and emptiness. Stephen's belongings were still everywhere, his presence lingering in every corner, every memory. The house felt colder now, heavier, as Lucy faced the reality of her first Christmas without him. Alone, ill, and emotionally drained, she stepped back into a life that no longer felt safe or familiar, carrying grief that would soon leave her dangerously exposed to the wrong kind of kindness. Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2021, arrived with the quiet tension of a day that would change everything. Across Staffordshire, families were preparing for the holidays, wrapping gifts, cooking meals, and filling their homes with warmth and routine. But elsewhere, two very different lives were moving steadily toward one another, unaware of the devastation their meeting would bring. At HMP Dovegate, 26-year-old Thomas Grant was being released halfway through a prison sentence for shoplifting. He walked out of the gates with no fixed address, no plans for Christmas, and no intention of changing the path he was already on. Staffordshire Police's Integrated Offender Management Team offered him help, accommodation, and support, but Grant refused it all without hesitation. He wasn't interested in stability, guidance, or a second chance. His only priority was feeding his addiction, a force that ruled his decisions and erased any concern for consequences or human cost. That same day, miles away, Lucy Clews made a decision of her own. Still grieving, still physically unwell, and still reeling from the loss of her husband, she left the safety of her bungalow and travelled to a flat in Hednesford. The property was later described in court as a drugs den, a place where people gathered to buy and use illegal substances, a familiar refuge for those seeking escape rather than healing. Lucy wasn't thinking about danger or risk or the future. She was thinking about numbness, about surviving the hours ahead, about getting through Christmas Eve without completely falling apart. Unseen by either of them, these two stories were now moving on a collision course, one driven by grief and loneliness, the other by addiction and opportunism. And before the day was over, they would intersect in a way that could never be undone. Inside the Hednesford flat, the atmosphere was chaotic, heavy with the smell of drugs and desperation, a place where people passed through rather than belonged. It was here that Lucy Clews crossed paths with Thomas Grant, a meeting that would quietly seal her fate. The group decided to travel together by train to Hampstead in Birmingham, where they planned to buy $250 worth of drugs from a dealer known as Sonny. During that journey, as the train carried them closer to their destination, Grant began to tell Lucy his story. He spoke of being newly released from prison, of having nowhere to go, of facing Christmas alone with no roof over his head. It was a carefully presented narrative, designed to evoke sympathy, and it landed on someone already drowning in grief. Lucy listened, not as a stranger guarding herself, but as a woman who understood pain, loss, and isolation all too well. She had just buried her husband. She was battling serious illness, and she was staring down the emptiest Christmas of her life. Yet even then, her instinct was not self-preservation, but compassion. Lucy made an offer that came straight from the heart, without calculation or suspicion. Thomas Grant could stay with her over the Christmas period. She wanted company, someone to share the silence with, and she believed she was offering comfort to someone who needed it just as much as she did. For Lucy, it was about human connection in a moment of unbearable loneliness. For Grant, it was opportunity, warm shelter, belongings to exploit, and a vulnerable woman whose kindness he had no intention of honoring. As the train carried them back towards Staffordshire, Lucy believed she was doing something kind. Grant knew he had found exactly what he was looking for. When Lucy returned to the bungalow on Bath Road with Thomas Grant, she welcomed him inside without hesitation, opening her home in the same way she opened her heart. She offered him food, a place to sleep, and companionship, treating him as a guest rather than a stranger. For Lucy, having someone there eased the crushing weight of silence that had filled the house since Stephen's death. Christmas Eve passed quietly, almost uneventfully, the kind of calm that can feel reassuring when life has already taken so much. On Christmas morning, there was a brief sense of normality, a fragile illusion that things were not entirely broken. Lucy's sister-in-law arrived with Christmas lunch, determined that Lucy would not be forgotten on such a painful day. The visit brought warmth and family love into the bungalow, filling the rooms, if only temporarily, with conversation and care. Thomas Grant was present during the visit, blending into the background, appearing as nothing more than someone Lucy was helping during the holidays. To her sister-in-law, it seemed like an act of kindness that fit perfectly with Lucy's nature. There was no visible danger, no warning signs, no sense of the violence waiting just beneath the surface. When the visit came to an end and her sister-in-law left that afternoon, the house fell quiet, once again. Lucy was alone with Grant. The door closed, the last connection to safety gone, and the illusion of peace shattered without a sound. What happened next inside the bungalow was an act of unimaginable betrayal. At some point after they were left alone, Thomas Grant turned on the woman who had shown him nothing but kindness. He attacked Lucy, stabbing her multiple times, each wound inflicted on someone who had offered him shelter, food, and trust during Christmas. The violence was sudden and overwhelming, leaving Lucy with no chance to escape or defend herself. But the attack did not end there. Grant then strangled Lucy, ensuring there would be no possibility of survival, no chance that she could call for help or identify her attacker. When it was over, Lucy lay dead or dying at the foot of her bed, in the very room where she had shared her life with Stephen. The cruelty of that detail was devastating. Just 3 weeks earlier, Lucy had stood in that same bedroom, desperately trying to save her husband's life, pouring water on his face, praying for him to wake up. Now that space had become the scene of her own murder. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that follows extreme violence, heavy and final. No cries, no footsteps, no signs of the life that had once filled the house. Christmas Day continued outside, unnoticed and indifferent, while inside the bungalow on Bath Road, Lucy Clews' life had been violently and senselessly taken. After Lucy was killed, Thomas Grant did not flee in panic or remorse. Instead, he made a decision that revealed the full depth of his moral emptiness. He remained in the bungalow on Bath Road, the very place where Lucy's body lay, and began using it as his personal base of operations. While Lucy lay dead in her bedroom, Grant moved through the house as if it now belonged to him, focused on one thing and one thing only: feeding his addiction. He began systematically stealing Lucy's most precious belongings, items that held deep emotional meaning but meant nothing to him beyond their cash value. Her wedding ring, the symbol of her love and marriage to Stephen, was taken without hesitation. 2 necklaces were also stolen, one of them having belonged to Stephen himself, a final violation of the life Lucy had built. Even Lucy's mobile phone was taken, cutting off the last thread of connection between her and the people who loved her. Over the following days, Grant carried these items around Hednesford and the surrounding areas, visiting people he knew, desperately trying to sell them for drug money. The ring that represented a bond meant to last a lifetime was reduced to a transaction, exchanged to fund the next hit of the man who had murdered its owner. At no point did Grant show concern for Lucy, for her family, or for the life he had destroyed. Her home became nothing more than a convenient shelter, her possessions nothing more than currency. Humanity had been completely replaced by hunger for drugs. For Linda Clews, the days after Christmas were filled with a growing, unbearable dread. Her daughter's silence was impossible to ignore. Lucy called her several times every single day without fail, and now there was nothing. No calls, no messages, no reassurance. By December 29th, Linda knew something was terribly wrong. The silence was no longer just concerning. It was terrifying. Just after midnight, Staffordshire police arrived at the bungalow on Bath Road to carry out a welfare check, responding to a mother's fear that something had happened to her child. When officers entered the home, they were met with a scene that confirmed Linda's worst nightmare. Lucy Clews was found lying on the floor of her bedroom, at the foot of her bed. Her body bore the clear signs of extreme violence, multiple stab wounds and evidence of strangulation. This was not an accident, not a burglary gone wrong, and not a tragic coincidence. It was murder. In that quiet bungalow, where Lucy had once hoped to find comfort and companionship, her life had been taken in the most brutal way imaginable. The bungalow on Bath Road quickly transformed from a quiet home into a major crime scene, as detectives began piecing together what had happened in the days Lucy Clews had been missing. Detective Chief Inspector Cheryl Hannon of Staffordshire Police's Major and Organised Crime Department led the investigation, immediately recognising that this was not a random act of violence. The scene told a clear story of brutality and betrayal, with Lucy's injuries showing multiple stab wounds and signs of strangulation, confirming that this had been a deliberate and sustained attack. As forensic officers worked through the house, they noticed something else, evidence that someone else had been living there after Lucy's death. Items were out of place, belongings were scattered, and certain possessions simply did not belong to Lucy. The most significant breakthrough came with the discovery of a knife at the scene, later confirmed through forensic testing to carry both Lucy's DNA and that of Thomas Grant. It was a silent witness, tying killer and victim together beyond denial. Investigators also noted that several of Lucy's most personal belongings were missing, including her wedding ring, necklaces, and mobile phone. Items taken not in panic, but deliberately. CCTV footage from the area showed Grant leaving Lucy's bungalow on Christmas Day, calm and unhurried, reinforcing the timeline investigators were building. That footage, combined with witness accounts of Grant attempting to sell Lucy's jewelry in Hednesford, created a clear trail leading straight back to him. Piece by piece, the picture became impossible to ignore. Grant had stayed in Lucy's home, used her possessions, and left behind evidence at every step. What began as a welfare concern had now become a meticulously built murder case, closing in rapidly on one man. On December 30th, 2021, just days after Lucy's body was discovered, police finally caught up with Thomas Grant outside a Tesco store in Hednesford. He was wearing a face mask, possibly hoping to avoid recognition, blending into the background of a normal shopping day, as if nothing had happened. When officers approached and asked for his name, Grant immediately began lying, giving a false identity without hesitation. The deception continued when officers asked if he had any tattoos, and Grant confidently replied that he had none. But the lie unraveled quickly when officers asked him to roll up his sleeves. Faced with undeniable proof, Grant was forced to admit he had a tattoo, his calm facade beginning to crack. The moment officers informed him that he was under arrest on suspicion of murder was captured on police body-worn cameras. His reaction was theatrical and dismissive. "Murder? Are you joking?" he said, as if the accusation itself was absurd. But the evidence already spoke louder than his denial. Though he was initially released under investigation while forensic work continued, the case against him only grew stronger with time. The mask, the lies, and the performance could not hide the truth that investigators were closing in on. Thomas Grant was formally charged with Lucy Clews' murder on May 30th, 2022, as the investigation reached its unavoidable conclusion. While awaiting trial, Grant made admissions about the killing to prison officers, statements he would later deny, claiming they had lied. The first trial at Stafford Crown Court began in November 2022 but ended after 19 days when the jury was discharged, leading to a retrial the following year. The second trial, held in 2023, lasted 5 weeks, during which Grant maintained his innocence, suggesting someone else was responsible while refusing to name this alleged attacker. The jury was not convinced. The forensic evidence, DNA on the murder weapon, CCTV footage, stolen property, and Grant's own admissions painted a clear and devastating picture. On August 8, 2023, the verdict was delivered. Guilty of murder. Grant delivered one final act of defiance by refusing to leave his prison cell for sentencing, choosing not to face the courtroom or Lucy's family. Judge Christina Montgomery KC sentenced him in his absence to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 25 years and 152 days. Justice, at last, had been served. But this story was never truly about Thomas Grant or the years he will spend behind bars. It was always about Lucy Clews. Her family spoke of a loss that words could never fully express, of a sorrow that would never leave them, but also of a love that death could not erase. Her mother, Linda, said she would always love Lucy, and that her memories of her daughter would live on forever. Her grandmother, Elizabeth, spoke simply and powerfully, saying she loved Lucy and always would. Lucy was not defined by how she died, but by how she lived, by her love for her family, her daily phone calls, her gentleness, and her capacity for compassion even in her darkest moments. Her final act was not fear or cruelty, but kindness. On a Christmas filled with grief and loneliness, Lucy opened her door to someone she believed needed help, offering shelter when she herself was breaking. That trust was betrayed in the most brutal way imaginable, but it does not erase who she was. Lucy Clews will be remembered not as a victim alone, but as a woman whose heart remained open until the very end. A reminder of both the beauty and the terrible vulnerability of human kindness.